said, and instead of really focusing on the passage I'm reading, I start getting lost in all of the connections that are made and where the places will mesh together. One of those places that I found in my study for this week was in Luke chapter 11. I was studying some of Jesus' teachings there, and I noticed in the way that Luke tells the story of Jesus responding to the other teachers of the law, calling him a person who's working for Beelzebub, someone who's casting out demons by demons. He rebukes them in this way and mentions a particular character, a particular person that we'll be looking at in our lesson today. So Luke 11, starting in verse 29, we read this. As the crowds increased, Jesus said, "This is a wicked generation, and asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was a sign to the Ninevites, so also will the Son of Man be to this generation. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now one greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now one greater than Jonah is here." Now, we know about the Ninevites. If you've ever been to a Sunday school class, you've probably heard the story of Jonah. If you've even watched the VeggieTales movie, you got a halfway decent version of it. There are fewer pirates and root beer in it in the actual Bible version, but you'll get the gist of the story regardless. But as far as the story of the Queen of the South that's mentioned here, you probably haven't ever heard her account and where she shows up in the Bible, because I don't think it's a story we tell very often. So I'd like to take some time and look at this Queen of the South that's mentioned in Luke's Gospel there. The story will take place in 1 Kings chapter 10. Incidentally, the same story is told over in 2 Chronicles, and it's so much the same. We'll just be looking at the version in 1 Kings chapter 10, so if you'd like to turn there in your scriptures, we'll be spending some time there. The version in Chronicles, as I mentioned, from a few subtle differences, is virtually identical, and so we won't really be touching on it. Even the way that the Queen of the South, or Queen of Sheba, as she's known in this passage, what she says to Solomon is almost word for word from where I read it in preparation for this lesson. So let's take some time and read this passage, but also we'll set up a little bit of where this person is from. Well, first of all, I can say Queen of the South from Luke's version, or Queen of Sheba, but unless you have some very detailed knowledge of the ancient Near East, you probably don't know exactly where this lady's from. So let's start there. Sheba, or as it's known in modern times, Saba, is a port city in Yemen. It has existed since the ancient times, and Yemen is on the the western side of the Arabian Peninsula, all the way down near the Horn of Africa. So if you're familiar with those two parts of the land, they're basically right at the mouth of the Red Sea. So all this trouble that's going on with the shipping lanes through the Suez Canal, and there is another pinch point besides the Suez Canal up into Egypt, and it's down there at the Horn of Africa, and between the Horn of Africa and Yemen, there's a narrow point at the mouth of the Red Sea where you have to travel up through to get to the Suez Canal and get to the Mediterranean. Well, in ancient times, the Red Sea didn't have a canal, obviously. The Suez Canal was built in the 20th century. Or the late 19th anyway. And the whole point is, we've got this modern invention of the canal, but what did you have? You had the Sudan, or Kush as it was known at this time. You had the Ishmaelites all the way up and down, or as we would call them in modern times, the Arabs, all the way up and down the Arabian Peninsula. And you had Egypt, and you had the southern portion of the Levant, that touched there as well. So you had shipping lanes and traffic and all of these riches from all of these very prosperous nations right around the Red Sea that all did trade with each other. And so Saba was in an advantageous point to be a shipping lane not only for there, but to Africa and to the rest of Asia as well, going around to Persia and on to the other places east from there through trade routes. And so it's a very prosperous nation for that reason. History and tradition tell us that she was probably from this city, since it bears the same name as what's mentioned in the scriptures. Ethiopian tradition, right across the sea there on the Horn of Africa, says that she was from Ethiopia, that she was an African queen of this Arabian place. So both can be true. You know, she can be from one place and marry a king, or her family could have taken over this place. It's not really that important as far as her, family background and what she may have been like. The most important thing for this purpose really is her character, but I kind of wanted to put her in the real world. So you can kind of picture where she's coming from, what kind of person she might have been. She could have been an Arab lady, or she could have been a black Ethiopian lady. But she would have been coming up from this southern city, this very prosperous country, and we'll also see how prosperous it is with the amount of money that comes from there, and the way she pays tribute to Solomon. You'll see exactly how much wealth is involved here. All right, so let's get our actual story now that we've got our background. We're in 1 Kings chapter 10. When the queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relation to the name of the Lord, she came to test him with very hard questions. Arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all of her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom that Solomon and the palace that he'd built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true, but I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told to me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your men must be, how happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king and made justice to maintain justice and righteousness." And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices, and many precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in as those the queen of Sheba gave to Solomon. Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of almug wood and precious stones. The king used the almug wood to make supports for the temple of the Lord and for the royal palace, and make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much almug wood has never been imported or seen since that day. King Solomon gave the queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. And then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. So the verse 10, I mentioned the riches there. A talent, just to touch on this for a second, how much money was involved here? If you look at verse 10, it says that that's about 4.5 tons of gold that's being brought in. 4.5 tons of gold. So this is an incredible amount of wealth that she's bringing to Solomon in tribute. Now you could see why, if somebody brings you 4.5 tons of gold, if they turn around and ask you for something, you probably just go ahead and give it to them. All of the things that she's asking for, that she has already well paid for in her tribute. But to get to the real point of why we're here and why she is so, in awe of Solomon's wisdom, it's not because she was poor and he was rich, right? We already saw that. She's already come and given him an excessive amount of wealth in a tribute, right? On top of the gold, she gave quantities of spices and precious stones. So she's given him all of this, tribute in this form, and made sure that he had all of these other things. But she has received instead answers to her questions, and she has tested his wisdom and come to know the kind of character he has and what kind of a person he is. So she's already rich. He's already rich. She already got word of his riches from her spies. But the thing that she wanted to come and hear about was his wisdom and to see the true extent of the wealth that had come from his wisdom. And her response is really interesting. She says that she hasn't even heard a half of what had truly gone on in Solomon's kingdom. The report wasn't even able to explain half of what Solomon had managed to accomplish. He was successful and blessed by the Lord in her eyes. And it was not because she had less than him necessarily. It was not because she was so impressed by his wealth that she started to respect him and give all this praise to him. What was it she actually says to him? She says, "How happy your men must be, how happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise to the Lord your God who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." The Queen of Sheba came to pay tribute to Solomon because she had heard he was wise and she'd heard he was rich. But when she actually met him, what impressed her was how good of a person he was how much good he did for his people. That God blessed the people by making him king so that he could maintain justice and righteousness. The kind of leader that she expected to see ended up to be something even greater. He exceeded her expectations. Because Solomon's wisdom was not just for Solomon's bounty. Solomon's wisdom was not just for Solomon's benefit. But Solomon was good to his people, and because of the way he was respectable, because of his honor and his justice and the righteousness of his character, riches came into his palace. His friends took care of him. His enemies paid tribute to him. His servants loved doing their work for him. His peasants were there to do their part, not because Solomon ruled over them and demanded tribute from them and extracted it with high taxes and all this other stuff, but because Solomon was so wise that people came and gave him gifts on account of his wisdom, just like the queen herself ends up doing. Because the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. It's interesting. I was reading the English Standard Version as part of my study for this, and they chose a different word besides maintain. They say to execute justice and righteousness. I thought that sounded a little bit more violent, especially given how it's Solomon's wisdom and his even-handedness that end up causing all of this prosperity for himself and for his people. And she's sitting here at this table, by the way, with Solomon as she's asking all these questions of him, giving these wise answers, and looking around at all of the surroundings that she can see. She sees the ways that the officials are seated around the tables, and the way the attending servants are, and all of the things that are taking place. And when she's seeing this, all these formalities and all of this that's around her, her response is, "How happy your men must be! How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom." This is a political leader. This is a ruler of a country. And you can imagine if she's making trips like this to see Solomon, she's probably making other diplomatic visits, right? She's probably going to other countries to make trade deals, to make peace talks, to do all the stuff you need to do as a head of state. So it would not be unusual for her to show up to a lavish meal. They knew she was coming. They made it nice. But her response was not, "Oh, you guys put on a good party." Her response was, "All of the bureaucrats who work for you must be really happy working for you because of how wise you are and how well you handle affairs. Even the people serving at the tables seem happy because of how good of a king you are, Solomon." But this wisdom, as much as we may miss this point, is not because of something inherent to Solomon. Solomon wasn't just smart, and so he got to do all of these things. And in fact, there's an argument to be made that he wasn't even born as smart or as wise as he ends up being. Because do you remember how Solomon gets his wisdom? He prays for it. He goes to God and says, I'm God. He says, "Thank you for making me king in my father's place." And God says, "Ask for whatever you want." Solomon says, "Make me wise." And so God grants that prayer to him. He gives him the wisdom. Now, you'd have to have at least a little bit of wisdom to know to ask for wisdom in the first place, right? A less wise person would ask for riches or power or whatever else, but Solomon knows the value of wisdom to start with. And so God grants that to him because of the wisdom of his request. But the whole point of what I'm trying to say with that is that if we want to look for people to look up to, if we want leaders who do godly things, we need wise leaders, not rich leaders, not powerful leaders. We need wise leaders. Because Solomon could have asked for riches, and he could have asked for power, and he could have got God's blessing, and those would have been from God if he'd asked for them. God would have granted them to him. Because he said, "Ask anything you want." It wouldn't have been wrong per se for Solomon. Where did John come from? For Solomon to ask for power or for riches. But he asked for wisdom, and as a result, got power and got riches. He made powerful friends. He made rich friends. He made friends that are so rich they'll bring him 4.5 tons of gold because they're impressed with his house. Okay? And so Solomon knew what he was doing at this point. But just to make the point here even further, to emphasize what the Queen of Sheba was talking about when she talked about Solomon's wisdom, let's read of some of Solomon's own writings. Proverbs chapter 1 is the sort of prologue to this great book of many sayings of wisdom. And the first part of this book starts with the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David. It wants you to know this is the guy who's putting this book together. He's the one who's speaking these words of wisdom. And so when we're learning what kind of a wisdom you need to be a leader like Solomon, what kind of wisdom you need to be a leader who the Lord blesses, it helps to read the words of the man himself. Proverbs chapter 1 says this: "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, the king of Israel, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance. For understanding the proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline." If you want to be godly and get the kind of power and the kind of prosperity that God has available to those who are godly, you have to follow the wisdom that God gives. And what does that look like? What did Solomon have as a discipline in his heart to be able to attain the kind of prosperity that impressed the Queen of the South that Jesus talked about? Well, first of all, you have to understand the outcome that you have in mind when you start learning wisdom. Okay? If you just want wisdom to be shrewd, to get one up on the other guy, to always be looking out for number one, to get ahead, you've already missed the point. You've already lacked some basic amount of discernment and wisdom. And how can I say that so confidently? Because when Solomon starts teaching his Proverbs here, he starts with this foundation, these four statements. You can change that for into in order to, for the purpose of, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and a prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add their learning. Let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Now, I read that again because it's kind of in reverse. The foundation of all of this is the fear of the Lord. And then all of those other four statements are what come out of the fear of the Lord. Attaining wisdom and discipline, okay, we already know that. Getting the wisdom and the discipline is how I improve myself, right? Being wise and being disciplined, in other words, being able to be a good student, is how I get myself smarter and understanding words of insight, understanding other people's teachings. All right, that follows on. We got that. By the way, the word discipline and the word disciple sound similar because they're from the same root word, and they're very importantly linked together. You don't get discipline unless you learn something. Now, if anybody ever beat your behind, they paddled you, and they called it discipline, but they weren't really trying to teach you something, that's just abuse. Somebody's just beating you to beat you. And not because they loved you and wanted to teach you something, that's abuse. But if you got your hand smacked when you were reaching for the hot stove, that's discipline. Because you either get a little smack from mom before you scorch your fingers, or you burn your hand. You learned your lesson either way, right? It's teaching. So if you hear discipline and you hear a beating, let's take that word back. Discipline and disciple are linked together for a very important reason. Discipline is the condition of the person so that their heart and mind are ready to receive instruction. Discipline is a state you enter so that you're ready to be dedicated to the cause of learning, specifically. For acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, you need the fear of God for doing what is right and just and fair. So did you notice that in verse 3? The purpose of acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, the outcome of that is you do what is right and just and fair. So Solomon didn't just get wise so that he could cheat somebody else. He didn't just get wise so he could use his power to muscle money out of all the people who were his subjects. He didn't get wisdom just so that he could learn how to use military strategy to take over all of his weaker enemies. That was his dad's job. David did all the conquering. Solomon got wisdom so that he could treat people right. He could do what is right and just and fair. And so that he could teach. Let's circle back to the Queen of Sheba for just a moment. What was it that won her over and really convinced her that she hadn't got a full report about Solomon? What was it that really made her know, I hadn't even heard half of how great you were, King Solomon? She came to him with the hardest questions she had, and he had an answer for every one of them. He was able to respond to her with knowledge and discretion, with discipline, with prudent insight, with wisdom. It was not just that he was able to do things on his own. It was not just that he had people smarter than him working for him. It was that he was able to think through and answer hard questions because he knew the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It was his relationship with God. And she saw that too, because she blessed the Lord on account of Solomon's wisdom. A leader full of wisdom is to be admired. And a leader full of wisdom like Solomon will be just and generous. He will be insightful, but his insight will give him kindness and gentleness. It will give him justice in his heart and not injustice. A leader full of wisdom will not be exploitative and oppressive, but he will lift up the weak and care for the sick. Even the people waiting the tables at Solomon's feast were happy in the eyes of the Queen of Sheba. It was not a given back in those times. Plenty of people with miserable slaves. Plenty of people who thought nothing of beating somebody just for being in their way. A leader who is wise does good things for everybody. And after that, people are happy to let the prosperity and riches flow in towards that ruler, towards that leader. The riches of Solomon were a byproduct of his fear of the Lord. The power Solomon had to influence the other kingdoms around him and to get the other kings to do what he wanted was a byproduct of how God had conditioned his heart and made him wise. So if you want somebody to look up to, you want a wise king, look for somebody like Solomon. In fact, better than that, look for somebody who's better than Solomon. What was it that we started out with our passage this morning? This is a wicked generation that asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was a sign to the Ninevites, so also will the Son of Man be to this generation. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now one greater than Solomon is here. We know one greater than King Solomon, and that's King Jesus. Do we bring all our tribute to him, like the Queen of Sheba did to King Solomon? Do we honor him for his wisdom and his ability to teach us? Are we disciplined? Are we disciples of Jesus who listen to his wisdom and condition our hearts to receive instruction? Do we trust him so that even when we're doing the lowliest of work, we're happy in the service of King Jesus? One greater than Solomon is here. But do we recognize him as our King? I hope that we do this morning. If you haven't accepted Jesus as your Savior and let him have his way and change your heart, we'd offer this opportunity now. You can take this chance and we can do whatever we need to help you, whether that be baptism or prayers of encouragement or restoration. We'd invite that you can come forward if you so desire as we stand and sing.